In Duel Links, it seems just about every few months we get a ludicrously strong skill or deck unleashed upon us. Now, there are multiple reasons as to why a deck would get this kind of status, and while most of the time it is an overload skill that just gives a deck so much advantage that it just blitz every other deck before it, sometimes the skill might just straight up skip so many steps and restrictions that you can just fill the rest of your slots with staples. Other times it's just the deck itself, where upon release it has little to no real answers to it. Now, when it comes to the latter, a ban list can usually bring a deck back down to earth, but when it comes to a skill, it's usually a little hard to do that. Sometimes limiting a few cards is all that needs to be done, but more often than not, it just needs to run its course and be power crept, or Konami will release a new deck or more cards that have more answers against the said deck. However, there is one deck that immediately comes to my mind when I think about great skill design without it being meta breaking, and honestly, the skill probably shaped how most skills will be made for the next few years. I'm talking about Immortal Sun God. Now, a little over a year ago, we got the Winged Dragon of Ra's other support cards and a brand new skill for everyone to run. Now, personally, when I first saw this, I thought that it was going to be an unstoppable force, but Konami surprised me with this one. So let's take a look. First and foremost, they fixed the main issues with running a Ra deck, and that's the fact that it requires a decent amount of setup in order to get into a playable situation consistently. Now, consistently getting a good setup would mean ending on a board that ideally would allow you to get to your next turn and give you a chance to fight back, especially if you're going first. So, how does Konami allow this for Ra? Well, a typical Ra deck focuses more on graveyard plays and uses the Ra in its alternative forms to gain an advantage and to OTK the opponent. So, naturally, the second part of the skill lets you set up by making you send a card with the Winged Dragon of Ra in its name or card text to the graveyard from your hand, while also allowing you to add Monster Reborn, or a card with the Winged Dragon of Ra in its name or card text, from the deck to your hand, or you can send that card to the graveyard. Wow, that was a mouthful. But overall, it was a quick and simple setup since, for the most part, the card you added to your hand should be enough to search out the rest of the pieces you need to go for your plays, while also getting rid of garnets like Immortal Phoenix and Ra's Disciples, if you happen to run it for some reason, like me. Finally, the third part of the skill is more straightforward, allowing you to add Monster Reborn from your graveyard to your hand if you have the Winged Dragon of Ra or one of its other forms on the field, effectively giving you some recovery, interaction, and protection if you have Dark Spell Regeneration in your graveyard. Now keep in mind that both of the effects of the skill are once per duel, so once you use the skill, it is now based on your actual skill and knowledge of your own deck, the opponent's deck, and how to use your limited resources as effectively as possible. Now, while the deck was powerful and lots of people played it and were even able to reach King of Games with it, it never felt impossible to beat. Essentially, the best way to beat a Rod deck was to make sure that Immortal Phoenix never hit the field, because if it did, your chances of seeing your next turn dropped dramatically. But the deck also had tons of choke points, such as removing either of the continuous spells as soon as they hit the field, dealing with the cards in the graveyard by banishing Immortal Phoenix using DD Crow, flipping the thing face down using Book of Moon, or various other ways of bouncing, banishing, or burglarizing the Ra from your opponent. And the thing is, most of the time, cards like these were already relevant in the meta, being played in order to beat some of the other decks running around like Tenyi, Live Twins, and Yubel heroes. So it wasn't like people had to make crazy drastic changes to their decks in order to beat it. Not to mention, since the responses for Ra were already in the game long before Ra even showed up, it meant people had lots of time to get those cards, which means the only thing that people needed time for was just learning how to beat the deck. Honestly, apart from the release of Tachyon and the zombie support that came out about a month later, just having the responses needed to deal with Ra was probably a reason why its time in the spotlight wasn't too long and domineering. And you know what? That's okay. Because despite trying to be like how it was in the anime, it didn't have to be the strongest deck in the world. It didn't have to be meta breaking, and honestly, all it needed to be was just a fun deck to play that everyone could enjoy. It just so happened to be strong enough to be competitively viable, while letting you get the feel of how wielding Egyptian God card should feel. All in all, this is still my second favorite deck to play. My number one favorite deck? Well, perhaps I'll talk about that one next time.